without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to some super big players and friends of mine. Rusty Keeler, Megan Dickerson, and Claude Stevens are our guests today that will be talking about the relationship between play and relationships. Take it away, guys.
Sure, well, I'll start off. Claude had come up with this idea for the US Play Coalition that we would do a session that would be disruptive and would be different than most of the sessions that we go to, where someone speaks to you and has a PowerPoint and talks about how great they are by trying to share knowledge. And I had no idea that Claude would be so disruptive to introduce like a pandemic to really disrupt this. So, you know, bravo. This is like great planning, Claude. You really figured it out.
My best.
Yeah,
Go Bats.
But I know that in the last few weeks or however many, are we on like 40 days, 7 weeks? I have no idea. I watched so many webinars where people kind of talk at me a little bit, or there's PowerPoints that we have more time to work on, and the PowerPoints are really cool. But the things that have been most valuable to me are the things that are conversations. And so, you know, even just like Stephanie was saying earlier, when we were doing our tech check, the conversation just starts moving. And that's what, you know, play people are like that. We can just have conversations and we can move things along in a very fluid sort of way. So I thought maybe I'd do a quick introduction of myself, Claude, and Rusty, you could do it too. We'd hope to have everybody do introductions, but it's so great that there's so many of you that it might be too difficult to do. In our emergent way, and we'll talk about that in a second, if you can, after we introduce ourselves, think about an object in your space where you are that you'd want to just share. You can just hold it up if you're on video, or you can describe it in the chat. Claude, what do you think?
That works for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And again, just if you haven't already, be sure to put your first and last name and where you're from in the chat box.
Yeah. And if you don't have an object you want to share, I'd like somebody, talking about what's outside your window, or just describe what the weather is where you are. So I'm Megan Dickerson. I work at the New Children's Museum in San Diego. We're a contemporary art museum for children, which is a whole other story. I have a background in play work, and so I've been introducing play work to the New Children's Museum over the last 4 or 5 years. And here's an object that is on my desk. This is a really creepy thing I'll show you. Oh my God, disembowel the rabbit and it becomes a bag. I know. Claude, you've got something even better, I'm sure. Go ahead.
This is way different than we had imagined a session for the US Play Coalition. We wanted to create a session that wasn't a session. It was going to grow out. We were going to play work a play work session. So it was going to be whatever the people in the room made it. And we had some amazing conversation. We had maybe 6 or 7 conversations together, a team of us, about what that was going to look like. And then we decided, well, there's no way to do that. So this changes that a little bit, but not all that much. First of all, my object is a crow. So this is really the mute. All those mute buttons there is really antithetical to what we want. This is your session as much as it's our session. We are going to frame it a little bit in these ideas around emergent strategy. So those of us that were going to do this have read a book called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And there are some tenets in emergent strategy. So we developed not so powerful PowerPoint for you on emergent strategy. So I thought I'd just hit those major tenets here. And one of them is that change is constant. So be like water. Water conforms to the shape of its container. Small is good. Small is all. The larger world reflects the small. In fact, we're living in this time period right now where the entire world has been shifted because one tiny little genetic change in one individual bat, in one market, in one country, has changed the way that we are operating as a globe. And so very small actions can have huge ripple effects. I can't read. There is always enough time for the right work. There is a conversation that can only happen by the people in this room at this time, and our job is to find it. Never a failure, always a lesson. Trust the people. Move at the speed of trust. Less prep, more presence. Now we have totally adopted that particular rule in this session. What you pay attention to grows. And so those tenets are going to kind of shape our conversation today. Rusty, I want to throw it over to you.
Okay.
Go, man.
All right. Hi, everybody. Rusty Keeler. Oh, I'm a stay-at-home dad. Like some of you, stay-at-home parent. And natural playscape designer and book author. I've been using this time to put finishing touches on my book, which has been good, you know. In some ways, this lifestyle is kind of my normal lifestyle, just hunkering down and being at home and being with the kids and kind of working, chipping away on my long-term projects. I've also, with Beth Myers, started a nonprofit called the Just Play Project that looks at play equity and how to create a more child-friendly city. And we're using my hometown of Ithaca, New York as kind of our guinea pig, and working with school districts and parks departments and planning department, engineering, and really looking at how children and youth needs and voices can be heard along all different sectors. And so how we can kind of improve the world that we live in and the world that children live in. And all of this stuff, of course, like for all of you, it's all thrown into a big blurry vortex. And I think, you know, we're all working to think, okay, well, how do we figure this out? How do we dig deep to the stuff, our values that we believe in, that we were working on before all this, but our values are still with us, and how do we move them forward? How do they emerge through this time? And in some ways, I mean, you may be finding this too, that maybe your values get stronger, or maybe you get closer to what your core beliefs really are when you're either butting against obstacles or having different outside pressures. Maybe, I know for me, it's kind of, you know, we'll talk later about all this stuff, but it's kind of a dance between the reality that's happening and what we really want to see happen, and then what the parameters are. And so that's part of this, for me, of the emergent strategy is like, okay, how are we reacting to this? And how are we able to reach through and find community or like-minded ideas and people, and to kind of bring those values out in the open again with what's going on and react to it. So I'll throw it back over to Megan here with that.
Unmute, Megan.
That was all planned. I just wanted to throw a curveball. Boom. Yeah, I think it's been interesting how some people during this time have wanted to, how do we take the structures that we had before and immediately translate them to this new way of working? And it kind of reminds me of, so I live in California, I live in Southern California, I grew up in Southern California, and there are people who came to Southern California in the 1940s, planted all these trees and things that they remembered from the Midwest or the East Coast or wherever they came from, and from, you know, other parts of the United States. And a lot of people came to California because they wanted to get away from allergies, right? And that they wanted a drier climate. And then suddenly people had imported all these things that they wanted from before and had completely changed that environment. So they had taken the things that actually they thought were great, but were actually detrimental to others. And I think that right now there's a lot of, as you're probably experiencing with kids and schooling, we're trying to take exactly what kids are doing in school and trying to translate it to home. So sit at a desk and look at the screen and listen to a lesson. And then there's some of us who are thinking, well, maybe that's actually not the way to be, you know, and maybe some of us are thinking, let's follow what kids are doing. And that's an emergent strategy, right? You know, I think Rusty, you've been talking about that a little bit with your own kids. Like, you know, at what point do you shut down the laptop and say, let's figure this out?
Yeah. I mean, in Ithaca, the first maybe 2 weeks, the district was still working on stuff for school. I have a 8-year-old who's in 2nd grade and a preschooler who's 4.5. And for those first bunch of weeks, we were having great times. My wife and I kind of worked out a rhythm of somebody doing, you know, childcare and somebody getting to do their work. And it was amazing. It was all emergent. It was all play-based. It was all stuff that, you know, we really believe in, self-directed learning. And we're in the backyard and we're in like the creek, you know, near our house, and we're finding, you know, the classic, like a dead bird, and studying it and burying it and writing poems and songs, but none of my doing, just following them. And it was, you know, it was so rich. And, you know, kind of the idea of like what a lot of you believe in, of like, you know, honoring the child and listening to the child and watching where it goes and being amazed. And I know for me, I had so much extra time with them, and they had so much extra time to kind of be themselves. And I had some of the most profound, beautiful moments with them ever, because of like this extended time.
Right.
But then the week came where suddenly the school district had their head down and was working so hard, you know, to come up with their distance learning. Suddenly there it was, and suddenly there were expectations, and we had to be there at certain times and plug in and listen. And then there's kids on the computer, and it just, to me, it just felt wrong. You know, my son goes to public school, and I'm a supporter of public school, and I like the teachers and the principal, and I do my best to, you know, I try to work with them on the outdoor space and, you know, be a part of it and support it. But when public school got reduced to a laptop on our dining room table, I just had so many mixed feelings. And then it was, well, how do I dig deep? Like, okay, my values, it was very obvious, like how I felt and how I feel about play and about, you know, honoring the child's direction and needs. And yet I felt this outside pressure of like, am I supposed to be doing this? And so I've, you know, it's still a dance, but it really made me even more clear in myself of like, wow, yeah, you believe in child-directed play and learning and all this stuff. And so here's this moment where you can really do it. You can practice what you preach, you can practice what you believe. And the teachers have been supportive of, like, you know, they trusted that my sons are having good experiences and all that. But it was still this kind of interesting thing to kind of dig deep and be like, well, what do I believe? And then in this time of change, when things are cracked open, what is our energy? What do we put our energy into, and where does it flow, and what do we learn from it? And then how do we connect with others that are feeling that same way? Because I felt like, am I the only person in the district that's feeling this? Like, this is crazy. But so that's, yeah.
So we want to explore relationships here, and a lot of us are in the position, I'm in the position where I'm trying to work through an organization, Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest, to hold space for play. We do that by going into communities and having play and bringing people to us and having play. And we receive grant funding to do some of this work. And whenever we do that, that sets up a power structure, and a power structure sets up challenges for relationships. So we might get a grant to work with an audience. In fact, the granting organization might say, who is your target audience? And so then we go into that community, and we're almost in the position of being play saviors, but we're not there to be saviors. We're there to work with an organization. And so that power structure is an aspect of colonization. And what we would like to do is decolonize, and we're even doing that in this session. So let's flip it. So I'd like to decolonize this session. There is a power structure that's evident on my screen. And in the lower left-hand corner of everybody's picture, there's a little red muted button. So Megan, Rusty, and myself, we're gonna mute right now, and everybody else unmute and jump in with responses to this power structure. How is that affecting your relationship?
We're losing funding from our city.
I feel like I'm losing connection with the people that are usually the closest to me because I don't have that direct interaction with them.
I think it's been challenging for parents to also be a teacher as well as a parent. And I think that maybe we'll come out of this with a new appreciation for what teachers do. And I hope that when we all go back to our classroom, that we remember that the social emotional aspects of teaching are the most important, and not be so hung up on what have these kids missed academically that we overlook where they're at emotionally.
Maybe people will learn that testing isn't as so important. I know Florida has said, okay, we're basically throwing testing out the windows. The high school kids, the only kids that are getting any tests are like the AP tests, and everything else they're saying, you know what? You guys made it through to the end of the year, you're graduating. So there's a relaxation. The kids aren't as freaked out about all this stuff. And maybe people will realize that this whole testing and freaking kids out constantly and stressing them out was not a very good thing to do. So I'm hoping something positive will come out of the fact that that testing is not occurring right now. Or at least in a lot of the places that I've read about, they've just basically said, you know, like my UNF has said, you can choose to get a pass-fail for the semester, and you know, told the professors go easy on the testing. So
to follow up on what Dee said about you know, looking beyond the curriculum piece, I know for myself and people that I do have virtual connections with, the best way I could describe it was being on the isolation roller coaster. One day I was good, and then somehow through the day I dropped again, and then I would come up a little bit and maybe down again, and there was lots of loops going on. I just felt, you know, we are talking about mental health and mental issues more, which is amazing. Maybe this is what's going to maybe push it over to the edge of the top of the roller coaster, and it's going to stay there and going to keep on going all the way through.
Okay. I'd like to jump in for just a second. You're doing this, but what are some of the things that's happening right now that you want to move forward? That actually something you're discovering through this pandemic that's a valuable thing that you want to carry forward. And it's like some of the things you're talking about. I'm back to mute.
I am realizing that there is real struggle for me between wanting to get my work done during the day and my daughter demanding, like in my face, demanding my attention at almost 8 years old. She's an only child, and we live in the middle of nowhere, and I am, along with our dog and our cat, you know, for the moment, the person she spends time with. And so for me, I want to move forward with really paying attention to her when I have the opportunity to pay attention to her. And only, you know, if things go back to kind of semi-normal and I go to the office, you know, that's been huge.
Hi, my name's Jan. I'm an environmental educator, and I have a bucket of sticks and some bark, some pine cones here, right here in my makeshift spare bedroom office. And I am passionate about outdoor nature-based play and getting people back outside. And in this time of the pandemic, I have seen more people walking outside my front door with their kids, with their dogs, and just being outdoors and embracing the outdoors. We are just now working on our first nature-based play area in our forest preserves that they're actually going to technically look at as a nature-based play space, because normally it's a place where you go to enjoy nature, you stay on the trails, you ride a bike, you hike, you walk, but most people don't go off the trails. I'm an environmental educator. All my programs are done off the trails, playing in the woods, letting the kids be like I was when I was a kid, letting the adults step back and see how much learning takes place when they get to follow what they want to do, just as Rusty had mentioned. And I am hoping that this time actually leads to more of that, of people realizing how important play is and nature-based outdoor play. So I think it's wonderful where people are outside. So thanks.
I would like to say something to what Julie just said. I would also agree that I've seen just a vast disparity in the kinds of spaces that are available to kids in different parts of my city. Not just play spaces, but also just access to resources. So I think that disparity is really kind of front and center right now. There are a lot of kids that I work with as a therapist, and they don't have safe places to play or to get outside.
Right. I want to jump in really quickly to say it's really difficult when we have so many people to have your voices heard, you know, and so Julie brought this up in the comments, that's another hierarchical thing. It's like who gets to talk and who doesn't get to talk. And that we can't solve it really in this group, but please feel free to write in the comment box too, if you can. And we'll, you know, maybe somebody else can voice what you're saying, or somebody else might hear it on the side and want to continue that conversation. Now I made everybody feel guilty about talking. Please keep talking.
Julie, did you want to say something?
I do, but it's not to that comment. I think I was off track. I got stuck on decolonizing the structure of play. And so if y'all would allow me, I think that in what I would like to see in decolonizing the structure of play is maybe an expansion of our concepts of what play is. When we see young Black and Brown children, they're just being policed in their play and in their play spaces, and so that in itself, outside of the lack of availability, that in itself is limiting how they are able to play. I think with a broader acceptance and recognition of what play looks like in different communities, then we could be more welcoming and open to it and expansive for it. So I just, yeah, decolonization stuck in my head, and I'm like, yes, just moving forward. I think there are systemic barriers that have been placed on the way that we play, and so we need to look at that. So anyway, thanks y'all.
Julie, I would like to follow up on that. And first of all,
Thank you for saying that. Yes, Julie.
So
Thank you.
that work is hard, and it requires a different kind of a relationship. It requires a non-hierarchical relationship. And you're absolutely right. What play is thought of in one community is totally different than what it means in another community. And there's no culture. There is no social class. There is no any subset of humanness that owns play. We all own play, and it all looks different for everybody. And we get caught in traps of trying to think that I know what play is, and I'm going to be the person who brings it to some other community. And I just want to tell a short story about a project that we're doing in Louisville. Louisville is segregated. West Louisville is characterized by more Black and brown people, more poverty, and more systemic racism and systemic whatever, and lots of isms in general. And we wanted to work in that community, and we received money to do that. Grant funders want you to tell them in advance what you're going to do and how you're going to do that. We got grant funding by following that way of thinking. But then when we went into the community, we tried to go in as flat as we possibly could. And we started a relationship by playing with the people we were gonna work with. And so before we had any kind of a conversation of what we were gonna do or how we were gonna do it, we simply gathered the adults. These are not children we're playing with. These are the adults that were going to be managing this. And all we did was play in their community. We asked them to invite us into their community. They did. We played hide and seek as adults. We made box sports as adults. We learned all kinds of rhythm games and clapping games that I didn't know. They're not part of my culture. And I think if we had not started that with play, our relationship would not have worked. It would have been hierarchical from the very beginning. So I don't know if there's others that can speak to that, but I'm gonna.
You want to do something, right?
Pardon?
Yes, this is just making me think. My mom's comment made me think about how I was reading a book recently, and sorry, I'm trying to multitask and respond to my comment. Okay. Made me think about how I was reading a book recently, and it was talking about how like implicit bias play like such a huge factor in like where children are allowed to play. So oftentimes you see like, I don't know, we might be like at a bank. The example in the book was a bank, and the white child was like kind of running around playing with the stapler, playing with the pen, but the Black child was not able to because their mom knows how they would be perceived in this space. And in this way, white children learn like they own or they're entitled to play and they're entitled to this space, the world is theirs. And Black children are learning that like for their safety, the world can't be theirs. And so I think like a lot of it has, if we're going to like decolonize play and we're going to really work towards like play equity, a lot of it starts like not just like in our play spaces, but like in our homes and in our conversations and in our dialogues, and checking bias as it comes out. Because I do think like there's a sense of entitlement that operates around like who's allowed to play in what play spaces. And that is received from children by this entitlement that adults have around like who's allowed to lead and be and occupy and take up space. So it's not just about play, it's about like what children are seeing happening in other spaces, like our workspaces, our classroom spaces, and even in our home spaces. So that was my comment attached to my mom's comment. But I was also just like thinking about like what it means to redistribute funding. So when you were just talking about like going into this neighborhood, there are a lot of like in-home daycares, like particularly Black in-home daycares, brown in-home daycares who are doing like project and play-based work, but they don't have access to like that kind of grant funding, or they don't have someone to write the grants, or maybe like even some of the people in the management spaces are like do not have like the literacy that would be required to fill out those grant applications. And like what it would mean for us as like play activists to identify those spaces and offer our services. to offer like our digital media services, our grant writing services to these in-home daycares that are already like not looked upon in the way they should, because now, you know, the wave is to like put your child in these like beautiful facilities with like these, you know, top-notch playgrounds. But these are like the original play spaces, like are in the homes, specifically like domesticated spaces. And so like what it would mean for us to like not just partner with like organizations doing play work or fitness work, but to partner with like daycares and like these domestic spaces that need the funding too.
Rusty, you want
Yeah, great comments. I would just made me think about, like, right now, Just Play Project, we had a grant for the summer of to work with the United Way to do play workers in 3 parks, in 3 neighborhoods, to have stuff and play workers and that kind of thing. But we just got a letter last week of like, well, okay, can you still do the program that you thought you were going to do? With what's going on, is it changing? And if so, how? And so, I mean, maybe to piggyback off the last comment there of like, well, there's money out there. United Way wants to keep giving money to do things, but some people, the camps aren't happening now, or the programs aren't happening because they can't, but other things can. So I think that's a question of like, okay, what can happen now with this money that's still like on the edge? Like, do they give it away or do they take it back? And instead of them having to take it back, how do we look at those places, the child care centers and the other places that could really use it for creative things? So it's like this.
You're also, sorry, you're pointing out the hierarchy, right? That this is coming from so you have access to it through the United Way, and then it's sort of, so if you don't already know the network of informal daycare centers, it's going to be really challenging to do that. But those things are happening. Like those are actually some of the most resilient parts.
How do you develop a relationship?
Because
when you think about things that also like my program, which is a Fab Youth Philly, we are an informal play here in Philadelphia. We go to different neighborhoods and blocks where they give out free meals, and we block off the block and we play for about 2 to 3 hours just on the street. We literally play with like environmental stuff. We build stuff with cardboard and rocks, and we do goose chases. And it's pretty cool to just see different people come out of their blocks, like the older adults with the younger people come out while parents are still working. These are like the informal caregivers who come out, and we teach them different games on how to educate on the block, which is like an informal play.
Like that's emergent strategy. Like that's like the core of it, where you're starting off. I think one thing that we've realized, like in many ways we're useless. So all these things, these structures that we're creating around, we have to do play in this way or this way. Kids are going to play no matter what, but there are inequities that allow some kids to play more than others. We were talking even before, the idea of being a Black or brown person wearing a mask in public is very different than me as a white person wearing a mask in public. And so the pandemic is bringing up all of these things that have always been there, but some people, mainly white people, aren't paying attention to them, right? Right?
Stony and Ari, I'm white, I have privilege, and I work at an organization that also has privilege and power and relationships that are built over an institution that's old. How would you like organizations like mine and people like me to enter into relationships with you? How do we start a relationship? How would you like us to initiate the conversation?
So we actually partner with a university, Drexel University over here, and we partner with Urban Youth Work. And how we partner, like currently we're only in 3 different communities. So mostly our program is for children who cannot afford formal play. They can't afford to go to camp. They can't afford to go to daycares. And so they're just home all day long. And so those are kids that we target for the summertime. So we go to areas, like one of our main areas is like Kensington area of Philadelphia. And we're there, and that's like a really low income neighborhood. So we go there and we actually play. We just block off the block because they're already home. We block off the block so that nobody is getting hit by cars and stuff like that. So we also had to partner with the city of Philadelphia to be able to block off certain blocks, because you can't just block off a neighborhood block from traffic. So just more funding so that we could spread our program to other different areas that really needs it.
For me, it would start with a conversation. My mom and I actually were just talking about this in another conversation before this call about like what it means to know that like the people who want to work with us are doing their work, like what it means for white people to be doing white people work, and Black people to be doing Black people work, and brown people to be doing brown people work, and like to be committed to that work, because I can't do our work if you're not doing your work. And so just for me, it starts with a conversation around like what is already happening in our spaces, our affinity spaces, and what we want to happen in our collective space. For our nonprofit specifically, the one my mom and I are leading, it's a Parent Like a Boss. We are working specifically around like literacies that exist in Black communities, because so often Black communities are looked at as like devoid of literacy practices, but that's because we already look at literacy through this like westernized white Eurocentric scope, where it's just reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's not what it means to read your community, to read the streets, to understand and make sense of what's happening around you. And those are practices that are historically cultivated through embodied movement and play in Black and brown communities. And so for a conversation like that to be started with us would be meaningful, because that is giving me the platform to say, like, here's what I'm already seeing. And in many cases, because I did not grow up in some of the neighborhoods or any of the neighborhoods that we've been working in Atlanta, I would then want to introduce you, because I know you're doing your work. I would feel comfortable introducing you to some of the leaders in these communities who are playing with their kids, who are in the streets and in these neighborhoods, kind of like Stoney was saying, like working in a neighborhood where play is already happening, and then making whatever provisions need to happen in order for that play to be extended and celebrated. It's working from a strengths-based approach where all people are aware of their strengths, and then they're coming into conversation about how we can expand and build them together. Like I said, I don't live and I did not grow up in the neighborhoods that we work in. A lot of them are incredibly poor neighborhoods. And so I myself would not be the person to lead that conversation, but I might be the person to bridge that conversation. But I would only feel comfortable doing that if I know that you have done your research, or you have been in conversation with other people, and the parties are ready to meet each other and move forward from there.
So I think I love what you said around that we have to be doing our work, you have to be doing your work, that work is different, and then we may come together and do collective work. And I think there's a conversation we need to have with the bigger power structure, the grant funders, the others, where we are allowed to build first of all, build a relationship. That's work in and of itself. That's usually not work that's funded. So that requires organizations to go out on a limb and build those relationships. And it's hard, messy, emergent work. And then have that conversation with the larger power structure and say, look, we know what you fund. You tell us in your funding prospectus. We know how you operate. It's written down on your website. We would like to have a conversation with you about changing that, so that we, who have already built this relationship, can maybe persuade you to think differently about your power structure, your way of operating, so that it can support a different way of us moving forward that isn't colonization. And so I think there's opportunity to build these relationships that can then change the larger structural relationships that are part of pathological structure within a community.
Right, absolutely, Claude, because the Drexel, the university we partner with, they're actually gentrifying this neighborhood, which is a horrible thing, especially for this area. But we don't agree with what they're doing, but we're glad that they're giving us funding to even work in that area, to maybe see like a like some hope or some brightness in that area beyond what they're doing. Like our that area is becoming like a college town, like University of Penn is building in from one way, and then the University of Drexel is building in from the other way. And then so like we know, like as in Ari's point, like I know that they're not doing what we're doing. They're doing their own thing, but they're also helping us to get out, get a starting point in it, to get out and be able to maybe change their minds after they see what work we're doing.
Well, one thing that came up, I've been meeting every Wednesday, and Claude and Rusty have been joining too, with a group of play workers, people from all parts of the country who are doing this work in their communities. And I'll send out the link too later on if people want to join us every Wednesday morning Pacific Standard Time. And one of the things that two play workers run an adventure playground in a very small community in California called Val Verde. And many of the people who work in their community are essential workers. And they've just seen in the last day a rise in COVID-19 cases by like 30. Like they went from, you know, a very small amount, and so it's going to get worse. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we support play in our community? And they were saying, well, I think we need to start figuring out, how do we get supplies to people? How do we do all these things? And somebody else chimed in, that's what play work is. So play work is like, how do you make it possible for a child to play? You need to take care of those basic needs first, right? So community work is then how you also build trust, because then you're developing those relationships that later on, when you decide to go and do something that's bigger or further, it's really based in what the community needs. And it's also based in that trust, but it takes time. Like that's the thing. It's like grants want you to do it really quickly, and they want you to do it in a year. They want, you know, but it takes time, right? Like we don't have enough time. I think we have like 10 minutes left on this call, and there's so many other conversations that we could be having, right? But it takes time.
We're not bound necessarily if we need to go over a little bit. Of course, I don't want to. There's
always enough time for the right work. Right.
So please feel free to continue the conversation. Go ahead. Is Delphine about to say something?
You know, well, I loved the topic when I first heard that this was the topic of the discussion today, because I teach at Cal State Northridge, and I always tell my students that play is at the root of all relationships, whether that be coworkers, family, friends, you know, that's like the root of all of it. We've been involved with programming with Japan, where we're only together for 3 days, but because our mission as our department is to educate on all that play encompasses in our program, that we're all playing, that by the end of those 3 days, it's so powerful leaving each other because we've bonded, and play is so amazing. And despite the language barrier, there's such a strong bond that I really feel, I too have been seeing lots of families out. I have to laugh because my 18-year-old, who is missing the rest of his senior year, has bought into what we're all trying to do in being safe. And he's made decisions to not do things. And it's kind of appalled him at times when he sees families taking off, and we've never seen these families in our neighborhood doing certain things. And on the one hand, he's angry, but then I had to bring him back and say, but sometimes there's just not time, and we're not making time to do these things. It's not that we don't have the time, and it's not that, it's just sometimes our value system isn't there. And I look at my own neighborhood, and I'm one of few moms who is out there in the neighborhood playing with my kids, playing tennis, playing ball, the water slide yesterday. You know, it comes back to a value system with parents, and if they don't value it, it's not gonna be a path that they're guiding their kids towards. And at one time, I think even organized recreation was like that opportunity for kids to be able to discover passions and talents, but instead they're kind of being possibly pushed into different outlets that are meant to help them, but are taking away that spontaneous playtime that they have available to them. And so I feel like it just comes back to parents once again of, we have to continue to, these programs are all great that we give our kids access to, but if parents don't support play at the fundamental root of academic achievement, kids are going to continue to not have access to it. And so I homeschool. I didn't have the hiccups in schooling my kids, but I have loved how it kind of gave the reins back to the kids, so to speak. But I agree with the speaker before, and I apologize, I don't have everybody's names. I've had some issues with my sound, but I agree that when one school kind of got back in touch with kids, once they had their game plan together, things, I saw some shifts, and it was, it's disheartening. And I can only hope that, we can use this opportunity to just kind of continue to empower them to play. I had a checker at a grocery store who, after this was like a month into things, tell me that it was the first time she'd pulled out a board game with her family. And I was pretty appalled, because I've pulled out board game after board game, things that we haven't played, and some that didn't even have an open yet. And so I was shocked that she waited that long. And I've had my own ups and downs with my own spirit and mental health. And I can't imagine what it would be today if I wasn't taking advantage of play. You should see the craft box. We're doing diamond art, we're knitting, we're crocheting. The beads are out. I mean, it's my garden. I have a garden finally, and there's 21 plush plants going. It's interesting, again, how we're utilizing our time, and I'm thrilled to see people taking advantage of being together and playing. But I'm also seeing, even in my own home, those that choose not to engage. And it's sad to see, because I can see that there's a layer of depression, and it's not, you can only bring the play there, but you can't force them to play. And I've got play all around my house, but I watch my husband just kind of not be a part of any of it, and he's watching movies, or he's just goes upstairs, and so it's interesting how people are using it during this time. And it'll be interesting to see. We're doing some research right now on how are people using their time. And right now the papers are due this weekend. And so hopefully next week I'll have a little bit more information, at least just what we're seeing here in California on our Southern Cal end here at Northridge. I do believe that play is the root of relationships. I felt it last year. I'm still connected with people from last year's conference.
So that's a good point.
And grateful for the opportunities to meet.
You're kind of thinking about those connections and how those move forward, and can you do those virtually? So the people that I've been contacting every Wednesday are people that I met at a couple different conferences. So they were in person. I know Rusty and Claude from conferences, I guess. Yeah. And so thinking about how those relationships are continuing, are those things happening in our communities? Are they happening nationwide? We have people in this room who are, I know, in Brazil, in London, I think there's somebody from Denmark, so right now we have this incredibly international conversation. But what does that really mean? Going back to that idea of like the small, is it really happening at that community level? Where's the small is good, small is all, right? So going back to that, how do you cultivate those little tiny fires, right? Those little tiny things that are happening, and how do you pay attention to them?
I think my thing today is to say, oh, I'm sorry, Claude.
No, go ahead.
I was just wondering, like instead of looking at it like a resistance to play, you can also view it as people who don't know how to play, people who don't have the energy or the knowing to engage in play, or playing as an academic, or people who just literally don't have the resources, like the people who still are working. Like when we're ordering food from fast food restaurants, there are parents that's away from their children who are not able to play. We're looking from a privileged standpoint of being able to stay home, work from home, be with our children, and do all of those things. But what about those people who are not so privileged? And not looking at it as a resistance, looking at it as a thing of bringing knowledge to people who don't know, or who isn't, so it's not all about not wanting to play. It's about maybe not knowing how, or not having that deeper connection with their self to even let loose as adults, to let go of the worry of what's going to happen next, and futurizing, and just being in the moment to play. That's the actual privilege.
So I know we're knocking on the end of this time period, but I really love what you all are bringing forward. Those that talked, and I know those that didn't talk have just as amazing things to add to this, but I really do believe that work around play might be the crack, the foot in the door that will allow new relationships to build. Because one of the skill sets of being a good play worker is being not directive, but being responsive. And so play people can go into relationships with each other and without a preconceived set of ideas about what has to happen, and then respond to the situation at hand. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, it can be small. And it doesn't have to go fast. It can move at the speed of trust. And these little bitty things that come out of play work may attack these huge structural challenges that we have. So we have amazing potential, this group of people right here, because there's another one here that says there's only a conversation that the people in this room can have, and we need to find it. And so all that needs to happen is maybe one or two people out of this double screen on mine. I have to toggle back and forth between two screens to see all of your faces. It just needs one or two connections, and then boom, something can happen that can change the world. So my hat is off to all of you.
Yeah, I think a big part is this idea of just permission to play. I think, you know, so many parents are wondering what to do, and just the idea that it's okay, that it is okay that kids have a little free time. And then, so how do we give parents permission when there's privilege and they have that time? And then how do we support families and communities that might not have that free time to play, but just the idea that it is okay. And you know, we all want more recess. Everybody wants more recess, and it's like now we have recess. And even if we like counted up all the hours all year the kids haven't had enough recess, and you added it to all the time that we have until the end of the school year, it's probably close. So just permission, but it's okay, and it's great, and it's beneficial, and maybe so many things could happen that couldn't happen before.
I love the idea that, you know, of the like that we've banked all the recess for the year, and now we're cashing in. That visual. And
put it in the chat box, but if you are a play worker and are familiar with play work or very interested in play work, I'm going to put my email address in if you want to get invited to the group chat that happens every Wednesday about some of these issues. And I also want to put another plug in for Octavia Butler, the work of Octavia Butler and Adrienne Marie Brown. Adrienne Marie Brown and Emergent Strategy we were talking about today. She's drawing this from the work of writer Octavia Butler, and she writes about change. Parable of the Sower is a very prescient book. You probably heard about it at this point, that she wrote many years ago, but really talks about how do you deal with change and what sticks. You know, when everything else kind of falls down around you, what lasts? And it's really relationships and connections with each other, and that's how we move forward. So again, that's my little plug for that. And Stephanie, sorry I talked over you.
No, not at all, not at all. I'm just I'm very heartened by this conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to make it happen. We've been sort of talking about it for a while, but because everybody is very busy in their respective lives, it got put till the very last day of the month. It's okay.
So I have an apology to Stephanie. Megan, Rusty, and I, we're not easy to work with. We didn't tell her anything about what this was going to be. She only got the 3 sentences about what this was going to be about when? Yesterday?
I think so.
Because we didn't know. Because that didn't matter to us. I know it matters to promotion and things like that, but.
Well, it only mattered just because I knew it was going to be great, and I wanted to make sure that people were drawn in to participate because it is the organic conversations that we've been having for the last few weeks even, but here in particular, that have just, I mean, already every time we have a session, I see natural new connections being made. I mean, the people that have spoken up today, I don't think they knew each other, but they do now. And so, again, throw your email and everything in the chat box, and I'm gonna share the chat history with the people who are participating today, so y'all can connect with one another, because it's all about connections. And I've joked about being underneath the same big sky from American Tail. I won't break into song this time, but we're all amazingly, we're all in this crazy world together, and play is really that umbrella, I think, that just makes it all happen. And so thank you for all of your unique voices that were here today. It means a lot. You are all experts in your own worlds, and so thank you for sharing. And yeah, I'm a little bit speechless, because every time these conversations are so meaningful, and I'm glad they're happening. So thanks to our moderators today, Rusty, Megan, and Claude. Kudos to you guys. Thanks to IPA USA for being an awesome partner with us always. And
Rusty.
Yeah.
Hey, Rusty.
And for those of y'all,
and you and you and you and you
and you and you and you. Yeah, thank you for trusting to come to a conversation that you didn't know exactly what it was going to be about, because that takes some trust to start off. And I would say, think about this: what you pay attention to grows, and I love that. So, what is it that you're going to pay attention to moving forward from this conversation that's different than when you came into this conversation? What's changed for you? And you don't have to respond necessarily, but just think about that. I'm going to be thinking about that. What has changed and what I'm going to pay attention to and notice in the next coming weeks, because we were here together.
Yeah. And I also was thinking, in response to something that Rusty said again about how we're giving permission to play. I think that we need to give grace to ourselves. I know that I have to remind myself, I'm not perfect, Lord knows. So to give each other grace, but to also give it to yourself. We're doing the best we can. So go play.
Bye, everybody.
Peace out.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys.